By the late 19th century, the industrial requirements of European empires had created an unsustainable demand for territory. As these powers pushed further into the African interior, their competing interests reached a point of collision. 14 heavily armed nations were driving their claims into the continent simultaneously. Without a system to coordinate these overlaps, a major intra-European conflict was a mathematical certainty. To manage this risk, the German Empire orchestrated a diplomatic intervention. The imperial government issued a formal invitation for the major powers to meet in Berlin and establish a rigid framework for expansion. The urgency was exacerbated by independent actors like King Leopold II of the Belgians. His personal claims in the Congo Basin threatened to destabilize the existing continental balance. The leaders in Berlin did not meet to prevent the exploitation of Africa, but to systematize it. They engineered a legal architecture that allowed them to partition a continent without engaging in mutual destruction. This diplomatic process produced the 1885 General Act of the Berlin Conference, a document ratified by 14 nations. This map illustrates the scale of the territory the act attempted to regulate. The treaty functioned as an administrative operating system, overriding indigenous sovereignty with standardized European law. The act established a three-part mechanism: a zone of mandatory free trade, a supranational infrastructure to manage transport, and a specific legal protocol for claiming new territory. This document codified military competition as a cold administrative algorithm. Article 1 defined the conventional basin of the Congo. The boundary followed the Niari, Ogowe, Shari, and Nile watersheds, descending to the Zambezi, enclosing a massive economic zone. Articles 3 and 4 imposed absolute free trade. Article 5 forbade sovereign powers from granting trade monopolies. This meant that no matter which European flag flew over a territory, all 14 signatory nations maintained the same level of economic access to its resources. In the Berlin Act, free trade was a diplomatic tool designed to prevent empires from hoarding resources and triggering border wars. The treaty's second layer was Chapter 3, which established the mandatory neutrality of these territories. Under Article 11, if a signatory power entered a war in Europe, their territories within the conventional basin were placed under the rule of neutrality. Belligerents were prohibited from extending hostilities into these zones, effectively banning warfare within the center of the continent. Participating empires accepted these military limits to protect the expensive infrastructure and capital investments required for resource extraction. This neutrality clause legally isolated the African resource zone from European volatility. It ensured that the flow of raw materials remained constant, even if the signatory powers were at war elsewhere. This illustration shows the difficult terrain the treaty sought to regulate. Navigating the Congo River system required a physical presence that paper agreements alone could not provide. Conquering this river system required a level of logistical coordination that had never been attempted in the region before. The treaty created the Independent International Navigation Commission of the Congo. Under Article 23, it was financially autonomous, negotiating loans using collected navigation dues as collateral. Most significantly, Article 21 empowered the Commission to summon European war vessels to enforce its rules. The Commission's agents were even granted diplomatic inviolability under Article 18, protecting them from the laws of the territories they occupy. The treaty did not just set rules. It created a supranational proxy state with the military and financial power to ensure European access to the African interior. While the interior was managed as a neutral trade zone, the coastlines were subject to a new, more aggressive legal protocol. Chapter 6 of the Act introduced the doctrine of effective occupation. This legal algorithm required two steps. First, Article 34 demanded formal diplomatic notification of a claim. Second, Article 35 required proof of actual administrative authority on the ground. Sovereignty now demanded physical infrastructure. Without it, historical claims were discarded. By setting physical occupation as the only legal metric for ownership, the Berlin Act triggered a relentless and violent scramble for territory. The individual chapters of the General Act were designed to function as a single, efficient machine for continental administration. The inland rules of free trade and neutrality acted as a buffer, preventing friction between rival empires in the resource-rich center. Simultaneously, The coastal rules of effective occupation provided the specific legal framework used to validate decades of territorial expansion. The act established a unified imperial consensus. The monarchs and presidents were joined under a shared legal vocabulary for resource extraction. The document's language is filled with references to improving moral well-being, but the articles themselves are defined by cold spatial logic. The 1885 General Act succeeded because it provided the legal and mechanical tools required to formalize the partition of an entire continent.